The wind howled through Dry Creek like a banshee, carrying with it the scent of rain and something else, something that made the horses restless in their stalls. Jack Morrison pulled his weathered hat lower over his eyes as he guided his mare through the muddy main street. The oil lamps flickered in the saloon windows, casting dancing shadows that seemed to whisper warnings. It was then he saw her. She sat huddled against the general store's wooden steps, a figure so covered in mud and grime that she looked more like a creature of the earth than a human being. Her long black hair hung in tangled ropes around her face, and her clothes, what remained of them, were torn and stained beyond recognition. But it was her eyes that stopped Jack cold. They were the color of deep forest pools, ancient and knowing, filled with a pain that seemed to echo through generations. "Sweet Jesus," muttered old Pete from the porch of the saloon. "What in tarnation is that thing?" The few townsfolk still braving the evening storm gathered at a safe distance, their faces twisted with fear and disgust. Martha Hendricks, the preacher's wife, clutched her shawl tighter. "It's not natural, I tell you. Look at her. She ain't said a word since she crawled into town." Jack dismounted slowly, his spurs jingling against the wooden boardwalk. The young woman's head lifted slightly, and those haunting eyes met his. There was no madness there, no evil, only exhaustion, and something that tugged at his weathered heart. "She's just a girl," Jack said quietly, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "A girl?" scoffed Tom Bradley, the town's self-appointed moral authority. "That thing's been sitting there for 3 hours, muttering in some heathen tongue. Mrs. Henderson heard her making sounds like a wounded animal. She's cursed, Jack, cursed or worse." The wind picked up, sending a shutter banging against the saloon wall. The young woman flinched at the sound, drawing herself smaller against the steps. Jack noticed her hands then. They were delicate despite the dirt, with long fingers that seemed to tremble not from cold, but from something deeper. "Where's your Christian charity?" Jack asked, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd seen too much cruelty in his 43 years. "She's hurt, scared, and alone. That's enough reason to help her." "Help her?" Martha's voice rose to a shriek. "Jack Morrison, you fool! Can't you see she's brought this storm with her? The sky was clear as glass until she showed up. She's one of them, a witch or worse." The crowd murmured agreement, their fear palpable in the thickening air. Jack had seen this before, the way fear could transform ordinary folks into a mob. He'd witnessed it during the war, seen how terror could make men do unspeakable things. He stepped closer to the young woman, ignoring the gasps from the crowd. "Miss," he said softly. "Miss, can you understand me?" She looked up, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Her lips moved, forming words in a language that flowed like water over stones. The sound was beautiful and strange, like a song from another world. "See." Tom Bradley's voice cracked with hysteria. "She's casting spells. She's calling down curses on all of us." But Jack heard something else in her voice, a plea, a desperate cry for help that transcended language. He crouched down slowly, the way he would approach a frightened animal, and extended his hand. "It's all right," he whispered. "I won't hurt you." The young woman studied his face, those ancient eyes searching for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she slowly reached out and placed her mud-caked hand in his. The crowd erupted in outrage. "Jack, no!" Martha screamed. "She'll curse you too!" But Jack was already helping the young woman to her feet. She was smaller than he'd expected, barely reaching his shoulder and light as a bird. Her dress, what remained of it, was torn and muddied, but he could see it had once been beautiful, decorated with intricate beadwork and symbols he didn't recognize. "You're coming with me," he said firmly. "I've got a warm fire and hot coffee. We'll get you cleaned up and fed." The young woman looked at him with something that might have been gratitude, then nodded slowly. As they walked toward his cabin at the edge of town, Jack could hear the crowd's angry voices following them like a swarm of angry bees. "You're making a mistake, Morrison," Tom Bradley shouted. "That thing will bring nothing but trouble." Jack paused and turned back to face the crowd. "The only trouble I see is a bunch of grown folks too afraid to show kindness to someone in need. You all should be ashamed of yourselves." As they reached his small cabin, Jack noticed something strange. The storm, which had been raging with increasing fury, began to calm. The wind died down to a whisper, and the first stars appeared through the breaking clouds. The young woman looked up at the sky and spoke a few words in her mysterious language, words that sounded like a prayer of thanksgiving. Inside his modest home, Jack lit the oil lamps and stoked the fire. The young woman stood near the doorway, still cautious, still ready to flee. But as the warmth filled the room and the smell of coffee began to permeate the air, she seemed to relax slightly. "Sit," Jack said, gesturing to a chair by the fire. "Rest." She understood that at least. As she settled into the chair, Jack got his first good look at her in the lamplight. Beneath the mud and grime she was beautiful, not in the way of the painted ladies in the saloon, but in a way that spoke of wild places and ancient wisdom. Her cheekbones were high and proud, her skin the color of honey, and those eyes held depths he couldn't fathom. Jack handed her a cup of hot coffee, and she accepted it with both hands, inhaling the steam like it was the sweetest perfume. When she looked up at him, her expression had changed. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. Hope, perhaps, or recognition. "Thank you," she whispered in English, her voice barely audible but clear as a bell. Jack nodded, settling into his own chair across from her. Outside, the night had grown peaceful, but he could still hear the distant murmur of angry voices from town. He knew there would be consequences for his actions, but as he watched the young woman slowly sip her coffee, her eyes never leaving his face, he realized he didn't care. Some things were more important than what people thought. Some things were worth the risk. The fire crackled softly in the hearth as Jack prepared a simple meal of beans and hardtack. The young woman, he still didn't know her name, sat quietly in the chair, her coffee cup cradled in her hands like a precious treasure. Every few minutes she would glance toward the door, as if expecting danger to burst through at any moment. "You're safe here," Jack said, stirring the beans. "I give you my word." She studied him for a long moment, then spoke in her musical language. When she saw his confusion, she tried again in broken English. "You, good man. Heart clean." Jack felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. "Just doing what's right, miss. What anyone should do." As the evening wore on, Jack learned more about his mysterious guest. Her name was Ayanna, which she explained meant eternal blossom in her language. She was Cherokee, from a reservation 200 miles north, and she had been traveling for 7 days through the wilderness. "Why?" Jack asked gently. "Why were you traveling alone?" Ayanna's eyes grew distant, reflecting the firelight like dark mirrors. "My grandmother, she die. Before death, she tell me, must go to sacred place, must complete the ritual of purification." She touched her chest, where Jack could see the faint outline of a leather pouch beneath her torn dress. "She give me sacred medicine. I must carry to place where earth and sky meet." Jack nodded slowly. He'd heard stories of Native American spiritual practices, though he'd never understood them fully. What he did understand was the look in Ayanna's eyes, the same look he'd seen in his own mirror after his wife died, the desperate need to fulfill a final promise to someone beloved. "The sacred place," he said. "Is it far?" 3 days' walk." "But—" Her voice trailed off, and she looked toward the window where the lights of town flickered in the distance. "Town people, they fear me. They not understand. I cover myself with mud, walk in silence, speak only to spirits. This is way of purification. But they think—" She shuddered. "They think I am witch. Evil." Jack's jaw tightened. "They're fools. Ignorant, frightened fools." "You not afraid?" Ayanna asked, her head tilted like a curious bird. "Should I be?" She smiled then, the first real smile he'd seen from her, and it transformed her entire face. "No, you have good spirit. I feel it when you give hand to help. Your heart, it know truth." They ate in comfortable silence, the beans and hardtack tasting better than any feast Jack could remember. When Ayanna had finished eating, she stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the star-filled sky. "My grandmother, she have vision before she die," Ayanna said softly. "She see man with blue eyes and gentle hands. She say he will help me when all others turn away. She say this man, he change everything." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. His eyes were blue, and his hands, well, his mother had always said they were gentle, even when the rest of him was rough as sandpaper. "What else did she see?" he asked. "She see great gathering, women of my people. They come to honor the one who show kindness. She say—" Ayanna paused, searching for the right words. She say small act of goodness create big circle of blessing, like stone in still water. Outside, the sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their conversation. Jack tensed, moving to the window. 3 riders were approaching his cabin. Tom Bradley and 2 other men from town, all carrying rifles. "Stay back," Jack warned Ayanna, but she was already moving, her natural instincts taking over. The riders stopped just outside the cabin, and Tom Bradley's voice rang out in the night air. "Morrison, we know you got that creature in there. Send her out, and we'll deal with this problem proper." Jack opened the door just wide enough to step outside, his hand resting on the Colt at his hip. "Evening, Tom. Beautiful night, isn't it? Don't play games with us, Jack. That thing's dangerous." Old Pete saw her talking to the wind, and right after that, his prize stallion took sick. "She's put a curse on the whole town." "Pete's stallion has been sick for a week," Jack replied calmly. "Ever since he fed him moldy oats. You know that as well as I do." "That's before she came," one of the other men, Jake Wilson from the livery stable, shouted. "Coincidence don't explain the way she looks, the way she acts. She ain't natural, Jack." "She's a young woman far from home, completing a religious ritual," Jack said, his voice hard as iron. "Since when is that a crime in America? Since she started hexing good Christian folk." Tom Bradley raised his rifle slightly. "Now step aside, Jack. We're taking her back to town for questioning." Jack's hand moved to his gun, the motion smooth and practiced. "No, Tom, you're not." The 3 men exchanged glances, and Jack could see them calculating their chances. They knew his reputation. He'd been a cavalry officer during the war, and his skill with a pistol was legendary in these parts. But fear made men do stupid things. "You're making a mistake, Morrison," Tom said, his voice wavering slightly. "When folks start dying, their blood will be on your hands." "The only blood that's going to be spilled tonight is yours if you don't get off my property," Jack replied. "This woman is under my protection. Anyone who wants to harm her will have to go through me first." For a long moment, the standoff continued. Then from inside the cabin came the sound of Ayanna's voice, soft, melodic, speaking in her native tongue. The words seemed to flow like water, and even though Jack couldn't understand them, he felt their power. The horses began to calm, their restless pawing and snorting fading to silence. One of the men, Jake Wilson, lowered his rifle slightly, a look of confusion crossing his face. "What's she doing?" he whispered. "Praying," Jack said simply. "She's praying for your safe journey home." Tom Bradley's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. "This ain't over, Morrison. Mark my words, that creature will bring nothing but trouble to this town." "Then I guess we'll deal with that trouble when it comes," Jack replied. The 3 men turned their horses and rode back toward town, their threats echoing in the night air. Jack waited until they were out of sight before stepping back inside the cabin. Ayanna was standing by the fire, her eyes closed, her lips still moving in silent prayer. When she opened her eyes, there was a sadness there that broke Jack's heart. "I bring trouble to you," she said quietly. "I should go." "No," Jack said firmly. "You should stay. Tomorrow I'll help you get to your sacred place. But tonight, you rest. You're safe here." Ayanna looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "My grandmother. She write about you. You have warrior's heart, but it beat with kindness." As Jack prepared blankets for her to sleep on, he couldn't shake the feeling that something momentous was about to happen. The old Cherokee woman's vision, Ayanna's purification ritual, the town's fear and hatred. It all seemed to be building towards something. He just hoped he was ready for whatever came next. Dawn broke over Dry Creek with the promise of a scorching day. Jack had been awake for an hour, quietly preparing supplies for the journey ahead. Ayanna had slept fitfully, murmuring words in Cherokee that sounded like prayers, or perhaps conversations with spirits only she could see. When she finally stirred, her transformation was remarkable. The mud and grime had been washed away in the basin Jack had provided, revealing skin the color of burnished copper and features that spoke of noble bloodlines. Her hair, now clean and braided with strips of leather, fell to her waist like a river of midnight. "We go now?" she asked, her English clearer after a night's rest. "Soon," Jack replied, handing her a cup of coffee and a plate of eggs. "But first, you need to eat. It's a long ride to your sacred place." As they shared breakfast, Jack noticed something different about Ayanna. The fear that had shadowed her eyes the night before was gone, replaced by a quiet determination. She wore her torn dress with the dignity of a queen, and the leather pouch at her chest seemed to glow in the morning light. "Tell me about this sacred place," Jack said as they prepared to leave. Ayana's eyes grew distant. "It is called Envi Asdi, the place where earth touches sky. My people, we go there for generations to speak with ancestors, to receive visions, to complete great ceremonies. My grandmother, she was keeper of old ways. When she die, she give me sacred medicine bundle." She touched the pouch reverently. "I must take it to Envi Asdi, perform ceremony of release. Only then can her spirit rest." Jack nodded, understanding more than she might have expected. He'd had his own ghosts to lay to rest, his own promises to keep. They mounted Jack's horses, his sturdy mare Belle and a gentle gelding named Thunder, and rode out of town just as the sun cleared the horizon. The few early risers they encountered watched them with suspicious eyes, but none dared approach. Jack's reputation and the events of the previous night had made their position clear. As they rode through the desert landscape, Jack found himself studying his companion. Ayana sat her horse with natural grace, her body moving in perfect harmony with the animal's rhythm. She spoke to the horse in Cherokee, and Thunder responded as if he understood every word. "You're good with horses," Jack observed. "All living things have spirit," Ayana replied. "When you respect spirit, they respect you. Your people, they try to break horses, force them to obey. My people, we become partners with horses. We ask, not demand." They rode in comfortable silence for several hours, the desert stretching endlessly around them. Jack had traveled this route before, but never with such purpose. He found himself seeing the landscape through Ayana's eyes, the sacred geometry of rock formations, the way the wind whispered through ancient canyons, the subtle signs that spoke of water and shelter. It was near midday when they saw the dust cloud on the horizon. "Riders," Jack said, his hand moving instinctively to his rifle. Ayana stood in her stirrups, shading her eyes against the sun. Her face broke into a smile that seemed to light up the entire desert. "No," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "Not riders. My sisters." Jack squinted at the approaching cloud, and as it drew closer, he could make out individual figures. Women, dozens of them, riding with the skill of born horsewomen. They wore traditional Cherokee dress, long skirts and decorated blouses, their hair adorned with feathers and beads. Some carried staffs topped with eagle feathers, others held bundles that Jack somehow knew contained sacred items. "How?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The wind carries messages," Ayana explained. "The birds speak across great distances. My grandmother's sister, she is medicine woman too. She know when ceremony begin. She gather women of the tribe. They come to honor grandmother's passing and witness completion of sacred duty." The lead rider broke away from the group and approached them. She was an elderly woman with silver hair and eyes that held the wisdom of decades. Her dress was elaborate, decorated with intricate beadwork that seemed to tell stories in symbols and colors. She spoke to Ayana in rapid Cherokee, and Jack watched as his companion's face lit up with joy and relief. The old woman turned to Jack, studying him with eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "You are the one grandmother saw in vision," she said in accented but clear English. "The blue-eyed man who would help our granddaughter when all others turn away." "I just did what anyone should do," Jack replied, but the old woman shook her head. "No, you did what few would do. You saw past fear to truth, past difference to need. This is great gift, rare in these times." The rest of the women had gathered around them now, forming a circle that seemed to radiate warmth and acceptance. Jack felt their eyes upon him, but there was no judgment there, only gratitude and something that might have been reverence. "I am Sequoia," the elderly woman continued. "I am sister to Ayana's grandmother, keeper of our people's wisdom. We have come to escort our granddaughter to sacred place, to witness ceremony that will release beloved sister's spirit." She dismounted and approached Jack, reaching into a leather pouch at her waist. "But first, we must honor one who showed kindness when kindness was needed most." The women began to sing, a haunting melody that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Their voices blended in perfect harmony, creating a sound that made Jack's chest tight with emotion he couldn't name. Sequoia held out her hands, revealing a necklace of silver and turquoise, the stones arranged in a pattern that seemed to shift and change in the desert light. "This belonged to my grandmother's grandmother," she said. It carried blessings of 7 generations. We give it to you, keeper of kindness, protector of the sacred. Jack started to protest, but Ayana spoke softly. You must accept. To refuse would dishonor gift and giver. With trembling hands, Jack allowed Sequoia to place the necklace around his neck. The moment the silver touched his skin, he felt something, a warmth, a sense of connection to something vast and ancient and beautiful. Now, Sequoia said, stepping back, we go to MV Asdi. You will ride with us, witness ceremony, understand why kindness to one becomes blessing to many. As they rode toward the sacred place, Jack found himself surrounded by a sea of women whose faces reflected strength, wisdom, and joy. They spoke to him in broken English, telling him stories of their people, their traditions, their hopes for the future. And at the center of it all was Ayana, transformed from the frightened, mud-covered creature he'd found the night before into a radiant young woman completing a sacred duty. She caught his eye and smiled, and in that moment, Jack understood something profound about the nature of kindness, about the way a single act of compassion could ripple outward like stones thrown into still water. The sacred place was closer than he'd expected, and as they crested a ridge, Jack saw it spread before them, a natural amphitheater carved into red rock, where the desert floor seemed to reach up toward the endless sky. It was beautiful and terrible and holy, a place where the veil between worlds seemed thin enough to touch. Here, Sequoia said, her voice filled with reverence, we complete the circle. Here, kindness receives its reward. NVHESD, the place where earth touches sky, was unlike anything Jack had ever seen. The natural amphitheater carved into red sandstone seemed to pulse with an energy that made the air itself shimmer. Ancient petroglyphs covered the walls, their symbols dancing in the late afternoon light. At the center of the sacred space stood a lone cedar tree, its branches reaching toward the heavens like gnarled fingers seeking the divine. The Cherokee women formed a circle around the tree, their movements graceful and purposeful. Jack stood at the edge of the sacred space, feeling both honored and overwhelmed by the privilege of witnessing something so ancient and holy. Sequoia approached him, her weathered face serene. You may enter the circle, she said softly. Grandmother's vision was clear. You are part of this ceremony, part of the healing that must take place. As Jack stepped into the circle, he felt the weight of generations pressing down upon him. The women began to sing again, their voices rising and falling like wind through canyon walls. The melody was wordless, yet somehow spoke directly to his heart, telling stories of loss and hope, of journeys that began in darkness and ended in light. Ayana moved to the center of the circle, the leather pouch now visible at her chest. She knelt beside the cedar tree and began to speak in Cherokee, her voice carrying across the sacred space with the authority of one who had endured much to reach this moment. She speaks to her grandmother, Sequoia translated quietly. She tells her about the journey, about the kindness of strangers, about the completion of the sacred duty. Ayana opened the leather pouch with reverent hands, revealing its contents, a mixture of herbs, seeds, and small carved objects that gleamed in the fading light. Jack could smell sage and sweetgrass, cedar and something else he couldn't identify, but that seemed to carry the essence of growing things, of life itself. As Ayana began to scatter the sacred medicine around the base of the tree, the women's singing grew louder, more insistent. The wind picked up, swirling through the amphitheater and carrying the smoke from small fires that had been lit at the cardinal points. And then Jack saw something that made his breath catch in his throat. The petroglyphs on the walls were glowing, not with any earthly light, but with something that seemed to come from within the stone itself. The ancient symbols pulsed and shifted, and for a moment Jack could have sworn he saw faces in the rock, wise ancient faces that watched the ceremony with approval. "Do you see them?" Sequoia asked, her eyes following his gaze. I think so," Jack whispered. "The ancestors," she said simply. "They come to witness, to welcome beloved sister home." Ayana rose from her knees, her face radiant with joy and peace. She spoke a few final words in Cherokee, then turned to face the assembled women. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly across the sacred space. "It is finished," she said in English, her words meant for Jack's understanding. "Grandmother's spirit is free to join the ancestors. The sacred duty is complete." The women erupted in celebration, their voices raised in songs of joy and thanksgiving. They danced around the circle, their movements telling stories of renewal and rebirth. Jack found himself caught up in the celebration, his heart soaring with an emotion he couldn't name. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Sequoia called for silence. The women gathered around Jack, their faces glowing with warmth and gratitude. "Now," Sequoia said, "we complete the circle of blessing. You showed kindness to one who needed it most. Now, see how that kindness returns to you multiplied." What followed was unlike anything Jack had ever experienced. One by one, the women approached him, each bearing a gift. Some brought jewelry, necklaces of silver and turquoise, bracelets carved from sacred woods. Others offered practical items, a leather pouch decorated with beadwork, a knife with a handle carved from deer antler, a blanket woven in patterns that seemed to shift and change in the firelight. But it wasn't the gifts themselves that moved Jack. It was the intention behind them. Each woman looked into his eyes as she presented her offering, and in those gazes, he saw genuine gratitude, respect, and something that might have been love. "These are not just gifts," Sequoia explained as the ceremony continued. "They are blessings, protection, promises. You will always have a place among our people. You will always be welcome in our lodges. Your children and their children will be remembered in our songs." When the last gift had been presented, Jack found himself surrounded by a small mountain of treasures. But the greatest treasure of all was the feeling in his heart, the knowledge that he had been part of something bigger than himself, something that would ripple outward through generations. Ayana approached him, her eyes bright with tears of joy. "You understand now?" she asked. "Why grandmother have vision? Why spirits guide you to help stranger in storm?" Jack nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I'm beginning to." "Small act of kindness," Ayana continued. "It like seed planted in good soil. It grow and spread, touch many lives. You give shelter to one frightened girl. Now 100 women call you brother. Your kindness becomes blessing that will echo through time." As the ceremony wound down and the women began to prepare for the journey back to their homes, Jack found himself changed in ways he couldn't fully understand. The necklace around his neck felt warm against his skin, and the gifts in his saddlebags seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Sequoia approached him one final time, her ancient eyes twinkling with mischief. "You think this is end of story?" she asked. "Isn't it?" Jack replied. "This is beginning," she said with a laugh. "You have been marked by kindness, blessed by gratitude. Word will spread among all tribes, Cherokee, Apache, Navajo, Pueblo. They will know your face, know your heart. You will never lack for friends, for protection, for welcome in strange places." She paused, studying his face in the firelight. "But more than that," she continued, "you will remember this night when you meet next person who needs help. You will remember that kindness is never wasted, that compassion always returns tenfold." The next morning, Jack rode back toward Dry Creek with Ayana beside him and a dozen Cherokee women as escort. The townspeople who had gathered to watch their return stood in stunned silence as the procession made its way down Main Street. Gone was the mud-covered creature they had feared. In her place rode a beautiful young woman in traditional Cherokee dress, her head held high, her eyes bright with dignity and purpose. Behind her came women whose very presence seemed to transform the dusty street into something sacred. Tom Bradley stood on the porch of the general store, his face pale with shock. What is this?" he stammered. "This," Jack said as he dismounted, "is what happens when you show kindness instead of fear, when you choose compassion over prejudice." Ayana dismounted as well, her movements graceful and sure. She walked directly to Tom Bradley, her eyes meeting his without flinch or fear. "You were afraid of me," she said in clear English. "You thought I bring curse to your town, but I bring only blessing. Blessing for those who show kindness, who open hearts to strangers." She turned to address the growing crowd. "My grandmother, she have vision. She see this place, see test of kindness. She see man with blue eyes and gentle heart who would help when others turn away. She see how one act of compassion would change everything." The Cherokee women began to distribute gifts to the townspeople, small tokens of friendship and forgiveness. Even those who had shown hostility the night before received something, a flower, a carved wooden figure, a small bag of sacred herbs. "We forgive fear," Sequoia announced, her voice carrying across the street. "We understand fear of unknown, but we also reward kindness. Jack Morrison, he showed what it means to be truly human. His kindness will be remembered in our songs for generations." As the Cherokee women prepared to depart, Ayanna approached Jack one final time. She reached into her saddlebags and withdrew a small leather journal, its pages filled with symbols and writing in both Cherokee and English. "This belonged to my grandmother," she said. "It tells stories of our people, our ways, our beliefs. I give it to you so you remember this day, so you understand that kindness is sacred duty, not just good deed." Jack accepted the journal with trembling hands, feeling the weight of its importance. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. "Say nothing," Ayanna replied with a smile. "Just remember that we are all connected, all part of same great circle. Remember that kindness to one becomes blessing to many. Remember that compassion is bridge between worlds." As the Cherokee women rode away, the dust of their departure settling slowly over Dry Creek, Jack stood in the street, holding the journal and surrounded by the gifts of a grateful people. The townspeople gathered around him, their faces showing a mixture of awe, shame, and newfound understanding. "Jack," Tom Bradley said quietly, his voice hoarse with emotion, we were wrong, dead wrong." Jack looked at the man who had threatened him just 2 nights before, seeing not an enemy, but a frightened human being capable of growth and change. "Fear makes us all do foolish things, Tom. The important thing is learning from our mistakes." That evening, as Jack sat in his cabin organizing the gifts and reading through Ayanna's grandmother's journal, he reflected on the events of the past few days. Her simple act of kindness, offering shelter to a stranger in need, had transformed not just his own life, but the lives of an entire community. The necklace around his neck caught the firelight, its turquoise stones seeming to glow with their own inner light. In the distance, he could hear the sound of music and laughter from the saloon, where the townspeople were celebrating their new understanding with Cherokee melodies they'd learned from their unexpected guests. Jack opened the journal to its first page, where Ayanna's grandmother had written in careful English, "Kindness is the language the deaf can hear and the blind can see. It costs nothing to give, but is worth everything to receive. Remember this, and you will never be poor in spirit." Outside his window, the desert stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, and Jack Morrison, Cowboy, protector of the innocent, bridge between worlds, smiled and began to read the stories of a people who had taught him that the smallest acts of compassion could indeed change the world. The circle was complete, but the ripples of kindness would continue to spread, touching lives and hearts for generations to come.